We want to welcome you to the second of the series on conflict that we are going to be sharing with you today. And we are so excited because this is our chance to kind of take the sting out of conflict, you know, and make it something that is like a learning experience instead of a trial and tribulation.
That's right, Christy. You guys are so excited. This is the second webinar of our conflict series. And today it's all about conflict basics. This is where we're going to take a closer look at conflict resolution and learn how to turn those negative experiences into more positive outcomes so that we can create those strong relationships. But before we dive into the content, you guys, I want to start off by introducing our wonderful panelist. Who would like to go?
I'll go.
Okay.
Hi there. I'm Christy Atwood, and I'm happy to be here with you today.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kalisha Cooper, and I am joining the panel. I'm so excited and so glad that y'all invited me here. And I'm also part of the talent development team at Civil Service.
And Monica Smith, and this is going to be awesome. Get ready.
And I'm Kimberly Broussard, and I'm so excited that you guys are joining with me with us today.
A question from Dana asking, what do we have an agenda? Here it is. This is what we'll be doing today. We'll be talking about conflict resolution model, and it's really a cool model that we'll be calling on today. In fact, if you've taken some of our conflict classes, you'll recognize it, so it's good. We'll also be talking about resolution styles in conflict, because we know we handle conflict differently. And we're going to talk about some of the most effective ways to do that and to use different styles. And then, because of the world we're living in right now, we'll be talking about managing the conflict process, not only in person, but virtually.
It seems like we have some good topics today, and I can't wait to get into all this content. So, did you guys know that different people use different methods to resolve conflict? And people usually have one or more natural preferred styles that they gravitate to when addressing conflict. So we're going to discuss the categories of conflict resolution from the Thomas Kilmann model. So that's the model that we're using today. And for those of you that have taken our conflict management class, it'll look very familiar. So if you look at our model, the first 3 steps allows us to analyze conflict by identifying what the real problem is, considering any feelings that are attached to the issues, and determining the impact that it's having on our workplace. So we're going to go ahead and have Monica take us into our first step, which is identifying the problem.
Thank you, Kim. Okay, so as stated, the first step is that we need to ID the root cause of the problem. And like Christy said earlier, yes, you can use it at work, but you definitely can use it at home. So I'm so glad. It's so ironic that we're actually talking about this today. So the first thing you want to do, we're going to look at a few questions to help you come up with figuring out what's the root cause for that. Believe it or not. So let's say me and my husband, we had a conflict today. Yep, I'm just going to put it out there. We had a conflict today. So the first thing I had to identify, what triggered the conflict? What triggered the conflict was my car wouldn't start. Why wouldn't my car start? So you have to figure out, who are you angry at? Are you angry at yourself? Are you angry at another person? Or are you angry at something? All I know is it's not me. Okay, so the next thing you want to do is, well, why didn't the car start? Going into the last question, is it simply what you're looking at, or is this just a symptom? Because if you don't correctly address the problem, then you're not going to resolve it. And we tend to address things based on what we see. So I bought a new battery. Spoiler alert, it did not start, okay? Because that was not the problem. So sometimes we have to delve a little deeper to really figure out what's going on, to identify why this is happening. So I said, well, why didn't the car start? Come to find out, it was out of gas. I could have just simply put gas in the car. Who's to say that that was going to resolve the issue or was the underlying issue. And the car wasn't starting because the gauge was broke. So guess what just happened? We've resolved everything to consider when you're trying to figure out how to resolve that conflict. And guess what else I just used? A tool that we call the what? The five?
Wise.
Wise.
The five whys. Exactly. Why? So, Jinkies, that's what you need to do when you're trying to figure out what is the root cause of the conflict, what triggered it, and that could be anything. That could be family, that could be work, that could be stress, that could be health, it could be anything. And again, identifying where the source of the anger is coming from. And lastly, just not going with that immediate response and making sure you're finding out the root problem rather than just addressing a single symptom.
Ronald just put in there a pretty good suggestion of trying to identify what that trigger is for the conflict. And he says that he just lets the other person finish first when he's trying to resolve it. And then he goes second to say his piece. I like that, Ronald. That way he says you're not talking over one another, or they're not bringing up something that's happened, you know, so long ago. They can just focus on what is the conflict at hand.
Good stuff.
One of my favorite ones is, you know, identifying what that complete problem is. Identifying, because like Monica said, if you don't identify exactly what the problem is, then you won't find the right solution for it.
Yeah.
So thank you, Monica. So
You're welcome.
How about if Kalisha goes ahead and takes us into the next step, which is identifying the feelings?
Yes, so this is another step in preparing for conflict. So before you're even addressing the conflict with the person, this is another step that you can take. Identify what your feelings are. And that way you are completely in tune with what's going on with you, your emotions, and anything else that may be escalating the conflict for you in that moment. So identifying your feelings also helps you to manage your own emotions so that you are responding to conflict and not reacting to conflict or to the person that you're in conflict with. So ask yourself, how does this conflict make you feel? Frustrated? Are you confused? And it's important to really be able to identify what your feelings. We find in classes that we teach that you're not always able to identify what your feelings are. When someone asks us, hey, how are you doing? Our go-to default answer is to say, oh, I'm fine, or I'm good. But those aren't really feelings. And so think about it. If it's hard to identify what those feelings when someone is just greeting you, it may be even more difficult to identify what those feelings are in the midst of conflict. But it's that much more important when you can actually name your emotions. Just like Julie said, she said, if you can't name your emotions, then you cannot manage them. And I don't know about you, but I have definitely said something that then I can't take back once I've said it. And it's all because I was responding based off of my emotions and not really responding based off of, you know, having those emotions managed. The other thing is to consider what feelings might the other person who is involved in that conflict have. So not making it all about yourself, which is important to have that self-management. But now we're talking about other emotional intelligence, really picking up on what feelings might someone else have in the midst of that conflict. What are some of the things that maybe you haven't considered or a perspective that you haven't thought of just yet because you've been focused just on your emotions? And so in doing that, if it's hard to really pick up on what their feelings are, that may be one of the first questions you want to ask someone when you're approaching that conflict. And then when you think about your feelings and their feelings together, how do those feelings impact how you handle the situation? Does it hinder you from resolving that conflict, or does it help you to have that positive outcome that we've been talking about before? And so you really want to be sure to consider these questions and use your active listening skills as well as you are looking to resolve that conflict.
You had some great ideas, Kalisha. I love the fact that you said you want to respond and not react. And I think, the biggest part is identifying how you're feeling, because if you're feeling anger, then you know that you're going to react. So it's really important for us to identify how we're feeling and do something to remove those feelings so that we can have a clear perspective.
Absolutely. You don't want to regret something that, again, you can't take it back. You want to make sure that you're going in with a clear plan and you're staying on top of that plan so you can have a positive outcome.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. I thought you were done. You can go ahead, then I'll pick up after you finish.
I do think that it is important for you to have some kind of clear mind because it could negatively or positively impact your interaction with that person.
I was just going to go back and say, because Alicia had asked about the 5 whys. And so the 5 whys is just basically where you ask why 5 times to help you come up with the root cause of the problem. So again, with the example I gave, why was my car not starting? So you again, yes, you ask why that first time, which is probably going to lead you to another question. So I replaced the battery. Why? Because the car wasn't starting. Why was the car not starting? Because it was out of gas. Why? Because the gauge was broken. So by the 4th why, now we know really why the car isn't starting, because the gauge is broken. Did that help clarify the 5 whys a little bit?
I liked it.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, thank you, Alicia.
Alicia got it. Okay, good. Okay.
All right, so now that we've identified what our feelings are, I think that Christy's going to go ahead and help us identify the impact that conflict has, because so many times we think that it only impacts the 2 people that are involved in the conflict, and sometimes it's so much more. So Christy?
Absolutely. Thank you, Kim. And yes, and the cool thing is now these 3 first things that we're identifying are getting us closer to deciding whether this conflict needs to be resolved or what. So this is like the 3rd stage of that, because you did identifying the problem, identify the feelings, and then we say identify the impact. And we got to stop and look at it and say, how does this impact each person individually? And this is one of those opportunities to step in the other person's shoes and really be able to say, okay, what's it doing to this person? What's it doing to that? Instead of just staying in our own shoes, which is pretty easy, and it's kind of like what Kalisha was talking about too, actually having that time where you're looking at the feelings the other person are going through. So taking that time to figure that out, stop and think how it's impacting the team. Anytime that you have a conflict that is causing team members to choose sides, you've gotten to a conflict that has to be resolved. It cannot be ignored. It cannot be avoided. It has to be resolved because it's affecting the whole team. And even further than that, quite often that goes into impacting the customers. And I'm talking about the customers both inside the state, because the things that you do go to other departments, go to other people in your department. Everybody else who inside the state who receives the results of your work is a customer. And even further, the citizens of the state are our customers. So if it gets to the point that it's impacting any of those customers, then it's something that has to be dealt with. We can't let that kind of conflict keep going. And something to keep in mind is, if you hold your mission, your vision for your team up, and you hold your productivity on this project up, and it's suffering because of a conflict, if it doesn't match up, then you know that it's time to address this conflict. And that's what we talk about when we talk about seeing if the impact is enough that we need to go ahead and resolve this conflict or not.
I mean, that's some good stuff, Christy.
I thought so.
It's because so many times, I know I've had, coworkers that I've had a conflict, and it was a little tense sometimes, especially when we're hanging out with each other. So it's important and mindful for us to realize that, it's not only impacting the people that's involved, but it can impact your team.
I just put in the chat there, but how many of you have known that there is a conflict between 2 people or between someone in the office, even if it's not between you, but you could just tell that something's going on. That's why
Yes.
it's so important to respond and not avoid it. Because if you can tell in those situations, don't think that other team members don't know when you're in conflict, or like Christy said, that your customers and clients don't know that there's conflict. Address it.
Mm-hmm.
And Ronald said you can tell by the person's tone of voice. We kind of talked about that earlier too. Christy was sharing how sometimes when someone is at an elevated volume and they're talking to you, just you talking in a calmer manner will help calm that person down and de-escalate the tone. Yes, the body language as well, Gretchen said. You definitely don't want to be on that Zoom call and you see those arms
Ooh,
folded,
yeah.
that head going left to right. So
That's
yeah,
right. And Julie says you
Eye
can
rolling.
feel the tension in an organization when there's conflict. I mean, that's right. Even if you're not in the middle of it, you can feel it that something is happening.
So when you have that kind of impact on the entire department, that other people are uncomfortable, that's a conflict that needs to be addressed.
And Joanne made a very good point, especially because we are talking about work related. When that conflict is preventing the two of you or more from working together to get the required work done. So that's a very deciding factor whether to act or not to act, as we talked about early on in the earlier series.
And if any of Ronald's teammates are on the call, make sure you do not roll your eyes. He does not like that in the middle of conflict.
Yes, yes. And like Mary's talking about, don't put people in the middle of your conflicts. That's not fair.
Ooh,
That
that's
is
not
not
Yeah,
fair.
that was taking sides. That's the worst.
But you know, sometimes there are people who like a good sounding board. Well, then what do you do in that situation?
And that's a really good point, because sometimes we just need to vent. We just need to get it out of our systems. So I guess in those situations, it's really important for us to say, hey, I'm bringing this to you and I need to get it out of my system. Don't want you to do anything. Just want you to listen, and be objective, ask me questions and things like that to help me think through it.
I like that. You're setting the expectations for what you need for that person. I don't need you to do anything. You said just listen and be objective. I like that.
And keep it
Thank you.
confidential.
Gosh.
I don't want you going back and saying, hey, Kim came to me and she said this. So make sure that you keep it confidential.
And talk about impact on the team. When things get out and you got the hearsay and the gossip, it just escalates it.
It escalates. Sometimes it does make the conflict bigger than when it started.
You definitely can set those expectations both ways. As the person that is listening, you can let them know, I'm definitely here to listen. I understand you need someone to talk to, but I'm not gonna provide any judgment. So
Right.
just keep it objective.
Right.
That way they know they're not looking to you to tell them what to do or how to handle that situation.
Good. So now that we've thoroughly analyzed the problem, you guys, our next step is to decide if we want to address it. So now I'm here to determine, am I going to address this problem or am I not? If you're not going to address it, then your go-to method would be avoid. And so that means you're going to go ahead and sweep it under the rug and it never happened. Or you're going to let it go. Just make sure that you let it go. You don't want to be, this is my area of enrichment. I'm being vulnerable right now and telling you guys that, if I avoid it and slip it under the rug, then when you do something, at least by the third time, I'll be like, in May 1999, you did this. And June 2002, you did this. Look, if you're going to go ahead and avoid it and not even talk about it, let it go. Let it go, like the song, let it go. And then if you decide, hey, I do want to resolve this, then one of your important steps is to make sure that you meet with the parties and define the issue. So you're going to determine who was involved in this conflict, because that's who you're going to meet with. Any party that was involved in the conflict, you're going to meet with them to go ahead and resolve it. And then you're going to determine whether this issue, you're going to determine whether this is an issue you're authorized or even qualified to address.
So Robin asked a question. She says, is it professional to ignore conflict between two associates? Knowing that they don't get along, is avoidance healthy for a successful working atmosphere? And I would go back to the tips that Christy shared when And we talked about, trying to set that, it was trying to identify that impact. If you avoid it, what's the impact going to be on your team? What's the impact for the clients and customers? So it may not be the best choice to avoid a conflict if it's going to impact how you guys are able to be productive as a team, and especially for those that you are serving.
Christy, can you reshare those tips?
And I will put those, I'll make sure those are in the handout when we post those, because we're going to use some of y'all's comments too in the handouts from this. So I'll have those tips in there. You're welcome, Crystal.
And two of the things that Allison and Ronald talked about, they both hit on accountability, because one, Allison talked specifically when it's best friends venting, what are the parameters with that? And Ronald talked about having that responsibility is taking ownership of that and how you're contributing to that conflict. So those two are going to go hand in hand and could potentially affect the bigger group. So you want to make sure you're being accountable for yourself and your actions and your role to not escalate that conflict and be a positive influence. Great points, guys.
I mean, you guys are on fire today.
I know these people had something for lunch that we don't know about.
All right, so once we've decided to address the conflict, there's several steps that are involved in, being prepared for the conversation. So Christy, I believe you have some tips for us.
Oh, is this one mine? Okay. Okay. Really important on this one is to narrow the scope to a single issue to be addressed. That is a big deal. You can't come in there with your giant gunny sack full of problems and say, here, let me put this on the table. Okay, here's everything that's a problem. We got to deal with this. You're not going to be successful in that situation. You're not going to be able to come up with a really good solution because you're looking at a scattershot of all of this stuff. So instead, at that point, you want to be able to say, okay, let's leave all that other stuff aside. Let's work on this one issue and get it figured out today. And then we'll schedule another time to talk about any other ones. But this is the one issue we're talking about today. And then you have to think about what everybody agrees upon as a positive outcome. So what is success going to look like? And really important in these points, don't be thinking about who wins and who loses. That's not part of the outcome. What it is trying to figure out what we're going to put together to come up with an outcome that's going to be acceptable for everybody, that's going to be a positive outcome, that's going to make our department or our group or our family, whatever, more positive. And that's what we're looking for on that. And we got to be willing to ask the questions to determine what we agree on. This is really kind of a fun thing to do, is to back up, and instead of doing like we usually do, we focus on the problem. Oh my gosh, here it is, this is the problem. Instead, go back to the beginning, go through each part of this situation and find, okay, well, we agreed back here, we agreed on this, we agreed on this. Oh, here's where we started falling into our problem. Then you're able to narrow down and really get a better view of where the challenge is. But you also have taken the time to figure out, hey, look, we agree on a lot of things. We're not so far apart as we thought we were. And at that point, you start realizing that you could be a lot more effective with this problem solving and conflict resolution session.
I love that, Chrissy. When I think about meeting with the parties involved, in my mind, I'm like, that's one of the most difficult parts. Is that this is the time that you have to actually address it and not avoid it to where it escalates. So this is where you're in this and you're being brave and you're trying to make sure that this is positive. Because so many times when we think of conflict, it has such a negative connotation with that word. We think, oh, all conflict is negative. And that's not the case. It's not the case.
Yep.
And that also kind of led us to where a couple of the participants had questioned, what do we do when it does escalate and it does become worse? And is it now a hostile work environment based on the behavior of the involved party? What actions should you take at that point? What would you guys say? I would say definitely consult your HR representatives to specify those workplace violence requirements.
Absolutely.
The chances are at that point too, even the parties involved can't be as objective. So you do need that outside person to be able to come in and help you and mediate. Yeah, we need to know that having somebody come and help mediate, having somebody from somewhere else come and talk with us on it is not a bad sign. It shows that we have an open mind and that we're willing to try to work through this problem instead of doing what the easiest thing is, which is sitting back and saying, oh, well, they're just unreasonable. You know, this is something that we need to be open to.
Right. And in the first series, we talked about, and you don't want to take on a responsibility that is not your responsibility, you know, so that may be something for someone else to address at that point too.
And I remember there was something that was brought up in the last part 1 of this series, knowing what your role is in the conflict and what you are accountable for. I mean, that's important.
She remembered that from the last one and she wasn't here. She just watched it. It's pretty impressive.
This is true. I didn't even think about that, Christy. So whenever you are, you know, analyzing the problem and you're trying to, you know, follow these steps, it's all about planning, and it's all about trying to set the stage for a positive outcome. So I believe, Kalisha, you're going to give us some ideas on setting that stage.
Yes. So again, we have decided to resolve this conflict. So that means that we are going in with a positive perspective. Now, I do tend to be a bit of an optimistic type of person, but I believe that, you know, all things can definitely be resolved when we are going in with the right and with a positive perspective. And so the first thing that we're suggesting is to set ground rules. This is not something that just one person does, but this is something that is agreed on by all parties. Think about it. When you go into a work meeting, you want to set ground rules for what each person should expect or how they should expect to behave in that meeting. Well, it's the same thing for conflict resolution. You want to make sure to set those ground rules. I want y'all to put in the chat, what are some great ground rules that you can set for when you're trying to do conflict resolution with someone in your department, or just in general, whether it's professional or personal. What are some ground rules that you can set? I know one of them we talked about earlier, I think Ronald mentioned it, is not talking over someone else. See, Ron, I was going to say it, but you beat me to it. So there's definitely a good one. So speak at your inside voice, allowing no speak over another, don't cut anyone off, personal space, maintaining respectful discussion. And Kelly, you bring up a good point. I would challenge you even more to define, what does respect look like to you? Because as we talked about before in other sessions, you know, everyone has their own preference of an idea of what respect looks like. Talking about platinum rules. So not necessarily treating someone how you want to be treated, but finding out, how do they want to be respected? What does that look like for them? Not attacking another person, not hitting below the belt, no name calling. Absolutely. These are some great ideas. Keep it coming. Keep it coming.
Yeah.
So we have these ground rules that this is kind of helping to set the stage. This is what we're agreeing to, or how we're agreeing to behave at the beginning of this meeting. Then we're going to identify what the conflict is. So Monica has already told us, and Christy, we're focusing on one thing at a time, not dumping that whole big, one thing at a time. So identify what that conflict for that meeting is, and then start to brainstorm what solutions are. And I would challenge you to just list out all kinds of solutions. When you're brainstorming, you take every idea and you consider it as a possibility. And then together find a solution that's gonna work best for that conflict. So there may be solutions that you've had for previous conflict, but you wanna focus on what's gonna work best for this conflict at hand. And then you wanna try to create a vision of what this positive outcome is going to look like. You've already decided that you are going to resolve this conflict, but what does that end goal look like? What are you and this other person working toward? How will you know that you have reached that resolution once you get there? Is it some strategies, or is it a promise or an agreement? Have you made a promise to do something for one another at the end of that? You need to know what that positive outcome is going to look like and have a very vivid description of what you're working toward. So that way, if you get off track, you know how to bring yourself back because you know what that positive outcome is going to look like. So a lot of people have already said in their ground rules, they're going to keep a positive tone, absolutely. And then agree on the standards and the deadlines for when you're going to follow up. So We don't want you to say that, yeah, you're going to do this at the end of the conflict, and then you never talk to this person ever again. That's not making sure that you are setting a positive outcome. You want to check back in with that person and say, hey, I know in our conflict meeting, we said that we were going to do this by this date. How's it going? Do you need any support? I've kind of hit some trouble in this area here, and maybe I'm not able to complete it by this deadline. Whatever it is you have agreed on at the end of this discussion, you want to be sure to follow up with someone. And just like you're saying, find a best way to follow up in a respectful way so that it doesn't feel like you're checking in on someone or that you're micromanaging them or that you're trying to boss them around. You're trying to make sure that that conflict is being resolved in the most positive way so that the next time you have to work with someone, remember, so I didn't say if, but the next time you have to work with them, you're starting on a positive front.
You really have some good comments in chat. Try to identify if there's just someone's feelings that are hurt or if it really is a conflict. I like that one.
Oh, I like that. Utera says, make sure you actually listen to the other side as well. So I know we've talked about active listening in the past, but I just want to revisit it again just for a moment. When we are talking about active listening, what does that look like to you? For some of us, it's nodding our head as I see Christy doing. Some people are smiling, or the other people like you guys are typing in the chat. You're asking questions, you're sharing comments to let people know that you are engaged in the discussion. There are other ways that we have different preferences of what active listening looks like, but it's important to know and to communicate, what that looks like for that meeting.
So, go ahead, Christy.
I was just going to say some great comments coming up in the chat. I love this that Tina said, conflicts usually occur with unfulfilled expectations. So identify everybody's expectations. I love it. There's some really, really good tips on this. I think the rest of us are going to be able to work more effectively with Kimberly in the future. So I just thought I'd bring that up.
It's interesting. Some of these things seem so simple. I mean, Alicia says, only talk about you and I. It seems so simple, but what gets us caught off guard is when we haven't identified those emotions or that impact, and we're going full in, focusing on how we feel and what we get out of it. But when we're able to kind of plan ahead, then we can go in with the best approach and try to have a positive outcome.
Something that I've been learning going through this conflict model, when I do encounter conflict, is looking at the other person's, from the other person's perspective, trying to identify how they're feeling and their perspective of the situation.
So Kim, you were vulnerable earlier. I'll be vulnerable now. That is really hard for me to do. I have to be really intentional about not just thinking, what do I get out of this? How do I win? And really try to focus on a win-win for both of us. But there are some times where I get in the mindset of, I don't want to know how they feel. I don't want to see things from their perspective. I'll be honest, I'll admit it. But if I'm trying to have a productive conversation, if I'm trying to have a positive relationship with this person afterwards, I have to look at it from that side.
It's difficult. I didn't say I was perfect at it. I said I've been practicing. So
The only other thing that I would add as a visual person, as far as those standards and deadline, please write those things down for me. That's going to help me, or even if I'm providing it, I'm going to write them down. And also when I provide that feedback, just have something in writing, and that's also going to cover your documentation as well, if that becomes necessary. So I'm that person, I need to see it. Yeah.
So that covers a couple things. If you write it down, you're more likely to remember it, and you have something that you can come back and reference. I like that.
all right, guys. So now that we've gone ahead and set that stage, now it's time for us to determine what style we're going to use to resolve this conflict. So Christy, you have some tips on how can we determine what style we're going to use?
Oh, yeah, I do. Okay, so first of all, determining what resolution style is going to get you your positive outcome. And like you mentioned earlier, Kim, I think we said about how some people have their go-to styles.
Mhm.
Some of us have certain ones. Okay, yeah, okay, that's something you have to keep in mind. Your go-to style might not be the one that's going to get that positive outcome you need. You might need to do some adjusting. It's not one size fits all, as most everything in life is. It's not one size fits all. So stop and think about that. Also, consider whether this is a situation where you are in charge or where you're affected. In other words, is this in your circle of concern or your circle of control?
Mm.
You know, we're concerned about a lot of stuff, but we only have control over these. So making sure that it's something that you actually have some impact in. And also really important when you're talking about, okay, we're gonna solve this. Stop and make sure you understand the level of authority you have in enacting a solution to this. So is this somebody that you are a supervisor over? Or are you at the same level? You know, are you below them? Just stop and think about that, because that makes a difference in the way that you're going to address this.
That sounds like what Susan's saying. Stay in your lane.
I like that. And she took all that junk I just said and put it in 4 words. Thank you, Susan. You're our next guest. Okay.
Absolutely.
That was good. Great.
I love this. So now it's time for us to go ahead, you guys, and talk about the different conflict resolution styles. And so the style of conflict management that you choose is dependent upon the dispute in question and what outcome that you're looking for. So some conflict management styles focus on maintaining that working relationship of all parties involved, while others focus on the outcome. So our first conflict management style is competing. And this style, it prioritizes the outcome over the relationship, okay? And so the goal of this outcome is basically, I want my way. It's my way that's going to come out of this. And so you're gonna use this competing style when you care more about the outcome than you do the relationship.
Yeah, and the thing about this one too is that it's very useful at certain times. When there's legal stuff involved, when there's safety involved, when it's a quick turnaround, those kinds of things. The challenge is if people use it too much, and if you have somebody who uses that competing style too much, we're not going to be willing to work with them anymore. I mean, we're not going to try to accommodate them in any way, because we know they're just going to say, hey, it's my way. We're going to do it my way. I'm probably not even going to go ask that person their opinion as much, because I don't want to just constantly be beat down like that. So it's one that's dangerous to overuse.
Yes. So our next style is our avoiding style. And this is where it addresses the issue, and like you avoid addressing that issue indefinitely. So the goal is to set aside that disagreement or sweep it under the rug. I'm a professional sweeper. And you just, leave it there. Now, sometimes you can go ahead and use this when it's best to avoid it at this time. And then you can use another style to resolve the conflict in a positive manner later. But this is the style that you would use if that disagreement is, really minor, like it's really not a big deal, or if it takes more time and energy for you to address it than it is to just avoid it.
Mm-hmm. It can also be useful when you have to have some time to cool down.
Yes.
It's just, I just need to step away for a little while. Let's avoid it for right now. We'll talk about it when, saner heads can prevail. I think that helps with that one. Of course, this one, if you overlook it or avoid it too long, you're probably going to end up with some problems. So, balancing out whether it's something that can be avoided or not.
And what I love about it is that you don't just have to use just one style. Sometimes, depending on the conflict, you can use more than one style to, get that positive outcome.
That is such a good point, Kimberly, because sometimes I forget about that. It's not all or nothing. You could pick and choose a bunch of these and create the right style for something. I love what Julie just said about avoiding sometimes happens when faced with a person in the competing type. Sometimes we avoid because that person's a competitor and I'm just not going to deal with that. And that's a really good point.
Mhm.
So our next one is the collaborating style. And this is where you prioritize that relationship over the outcome. So the goal when you're collaborating is to meet all of the needs of all the parties that are involved in that conflict. And this style is best used when you care more about that relationship than you do about the outcome.
I love collaborating in a way because everybody brings their information. You put it all on the table, and by the time you get through, it is not any one person's solution. It's everybody's. And that's so exciting to see when you're able to put it together and say, this is something that's better than anything we could have done separately. This is really good. Of course, the challenge with collaborating is the fact that it is very time consuming. It's not something that you just knock out when there's, hey, we need to know something immediately. Let's collaborate. No, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And Jo has identified that when she collaborates, she feels that both parties are able to leave satisfied. So she agrees it is time consuming, but both people can leave satisfied from their conflict resolution.
Yeah. So our next one is compromising. And this is the style that puts equal emphasis on both the relationship and that outcome. The goal is that, both parties feel somewhat satisfied with the outcome because, you each get a little bit of what you wanted. And so this is used when, there's a deadline that's approaching or any solutions is better than no solutions.
Yeah. And I know people talk about compromising sometimes kind of negatively because they say, oh, everybody has to give up something. But that's looking at the glass being half empty to me,
Right.
because it's like, okay, everybody got a little piece of what they wanted in this, then we've done something well, and you just got to be sure that you keep in mind the ultimate vision and the mission of what you're trying to accomplish, and make sure that you don't give up any of that. Because it's okay to give up some of our points on it, but not what the actual outcome has to include.
So our last style, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kalisha.
I was gonna say, I think I tend to fall a little bit in that collaborating and compromising too. Just like Julie said, that she's kind of a combo of both of those. I don't mind having to, give in a little bit if ultimately the team wins or the organization wins as a whole.
That's how I feel. As long as either a team, the organization, or one of us is winning, I don't mind with that collaborating and compromising.
So our last very interesting. Oh my bad. I was just gonna say her additional comment, right? That Chrissy is commenting on about the half empty, half full. That's not really the priority. Rather that it's refillable.
I like
that isn't the end of the game.
Oh.
Where do we go from here, regardless of which way you see it?
Yeah.
That's a great point.
Not half empty, not half full. Just time to call the waiter back. Okay.
So our last style is the accommodating style. And this is where it prioritizes that relationship over the outcome. And so the goal is to, is to concede in the argument and let the other person, have their way. And so this style is best used when maybe you're in the wrong or the relationship is far more, is worth far more than the outcome.
Yeah, those long-term relationships mean that sometimes we give in on this one, knowing that the next time, somebody else might give in. And that's great for relationships. The one challenge that I see with accommodating, because this is one that I default to an awful lot, is that you can find yourself, giving in, just being nice, and it's not necessarily the best solution. So sometimes your great ideas go unheard. Sometimes you're hiding your light under a bushel because you're just accommodating, and you got to be really careful. I like this that Kimberly on here says about accommodating means, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And there's something to be said to that. I gotta say, that's really good. But yeah, accommodating is great, that we're willing to give in. We just need to be sure that, once again, the final product or the final outcome doesn't suffer because we accommodated. And sometimes that means we have to be a little bit more assertive. I'm working on it.
First step is admittance.
Exactly. So looking at this, you guys, do you guys have a preferred style? What's your go-to style?
Yeah,
You're
I
asking,
think compromising and collaborating. I think those are it for me. I like to feel like everyone is satisfied at the end of the conversation, just like I believe it was Julie earlier who said that. But there's
I
a
think for me, it's just going to depend on what's happening at the time because I really can see myself doing any one of them and possibly even changing my initial response based on what happened and what events changed. So I'm not really just a stiff, this is what I do type of person. I definitely see the value in flexibility. I think that's kind of where you get lost when you're like, this is what I am and I'm going to do this regardless of what's happening. So I think that's a great point to take away. Just, hey, maybe this is what you normally do, but this would work better on this occasion. And also recognizing this is not going to work. So having that flexibility.
Yeah. I believe Chrissy said that earlier when she said that, you know, your go-to style is not always the best option, that you do have to be flexible because, you know, if your predominant is avoiding, then you're going to be one stressful man or woman, you know, if all you do is avoid and not, you know, address that conflict. So,
Yeah, you definitely got to pick your battles and you can't, some things can't be avoided. So you're kind of setting yourself up on that one.
I see representation in the chat from just about every conflict resolution style. I think maybe except competing, which not to put anyone on the spot, but there's a lot of compromising, accommodating, a lot of collaborating in the chat there.
that's some good ones.
I can see that though, because ultimately I think people want to get along well with other people.
Yes.
And that also helps you get that buy-in. Like Chrissy was saying, it's not what you're taking or not getting, it's that everybody got to put a part in it.
So now that we've taken a look at what style that we're going to choose, you guys, now it's time for us to determine what delivery method are we going to use. And I believe, Kalisha, you're going to have some tips on that, right?
Yes. So when you're in the middle of conflict, we're trying to determine how do you respond? Do you respond through email? Do you respond through text, maybe face-to-face, in person? I recently read a Forbes article and I want you to type in the chat, which of those do you think they said is the less favorable way to respond in the midst of conflict? The less favorable way to respond. Email, one. And surprisingly over text, but email was the less favorable way. And now tell me, why is that? Why do you think that it was email that came up as a less favorable way? When we think about we're so frustrated with someone, it can be misunderstood. Tone, absolutely. It does seem impersonal. And so that's all the reasons why we're saying that face-to-face communication can be one of the better ways to respond in the midst of conflict, is because you get to correct your tone if you see that nonverbal communication from someone that maybe something that you said, a word that you used, didn't respond or was not well received by the person that you're talking to. If you say something, that you can apologize right away, and there's not that lingering pause that you get from email or text message where you're just waiting for someone to respond. And in the back of your mind, now you're going through all of this, you know, well, what did they say? Or what did I say? Or how am I going to say? Well, what's taking us so long? And now you have this conspiracy theory of what's happening. And it's not even really the case, right? So we're suggesting, if you can, to use face-to-face communication in the midst of your conflict. Face-to-face communication is really going to help you to communicate the positive language that you're looking for. It's going to help to try to alleviate from that negative tone. It's going to allow for you to see someone else's reactions to what you're saying, and they can also see your reactions of it. But if there is a case where you do have to use email to resolve your conflict, be the first to admit that this is not the way that you would want to resolve conflict, that you would prefer to have that conflict resolved face-to-face or maybe through video nowadays if you're talking through Zoom. But you just want to make sure that someone is not suspicious of the email that you're using, or that they're not getting the wrong message from you responding through email. You want to make sure to address that elephant that's in the room. And then again, if you have to use email, or really even if you are talking to someone face to face or virtually, you want to make sure that you are using positive language to respond to that to what they're saying. So watch the language, or be aware of the language that you're using. You want to also be aware of what conflict resolution style you're using and they're using. And then again, be flexible in that moment of trying to focus on, what do I need to do to get that positive resolution? It's important that we stay away from the bold text and the emails, or we stay away from raising our tone, because oftentimes when we are in the moment, our inflection changes and we may not be aware of it right away. But if we could go back and think about it, we may have done some things a little bit differently, or said some things a little bit differently. So just be aware of what those things are in the midst of that conflict, and what those triggers may be for you. I would just say that one last thing is to also be aware of your communication style. You know, what are some of the things that get you riled up, and what are some of the things that will help to de-escalate that conflict?
I tell you what, we have
those
some
passive aggressive statements, definitely, Tara.
Yeah, we have some good tips, you guys, and we want to hear from you guys in the chat. So keep it coming. Any best practices that you guys want to share that you do?
I got to say that we're getting so many good ones in the chat. We're going to have to put a bunch of this stuff into the handout, because there's two. By the way, if you don't want your name mentioned on any of your chat items, I'm going to remind you right now, please send us a message saying that you don't want your name in there, because otherwise we might quote you and say, hey, this was a great idea we got from Angela or Kimberly or somebody. So just want you to know that. But yeah, these are some great ideas.
And Kimberly asked a really good question. What do you do when you did have that face-to-face interaction and you thought it went well, that it went great, the issue was resolved, and you return to your computer and there's an email that says something completely different? So what would you guys do in that instance? Panel, how would you respond to that?
That's when I pick up the phone.
That's smart.
I pick up the phone and call, and make sure it's a good time. See, Angela, you agree. Make sure it's a good time to talk to that person about it. But it's always best for me to just clear up that communication and over the phone, versus trying to send that email back and forth. We have something that we used, the rule of 3. If you're going back and forth and text and email 3 times, it may be time to try to schedule a phone conversation.
Really a good idea. I tell you what, we've been having some good ideas in here, you guys. And something else that we didn't talk about, but and maybe we did. When should you involve HR?
That's what Allison just asked. When would a moderator be necessary? At what point would you invite them into the conversation? I think kind of like how somebody mentioned earlier, if you have to question if it's a workplace violence type of situation, or you have that uncomfortable feeling with having that exchange, I think that's a fair time.
Yeah, definitely trust your instincts there.
Oh, thank you, guys. That's some really good questions. So now we have these closing thoughts. My panelists, any closing thoughts? I said clothing thoughts. Any closing thoughts that you guys have?
Well, I'll wait till everybody gives their clothing thoughts, and then I'll give a closing thought.
Well, my closing thought is we look really nice today. Thank you guys for the compliment.
I second that.
My closing thought is that I think it's been some great feedback from the panel, from the participants, and I think that's where we really get that useful information from and new ideas, and just continue to bring that to these webinars for us, and we definitely appreciate it.
Absolutely. I would say for me, go into, this is positive Patty again, but go into that conflict already thinking positive about how it's going to turn out, how they're going to respond, that it's going to be a positive resolution. Feeding yourself that positive energy and having a positive mindset, it really does change your perspective going in. You go from that fight or flight mode to you actually being able to be a little bit more rational and being able to manage, everything going into it.
And for me, I think it would be the fact that we really do have to get away from the idea of looking at conflict as a negative thing. Conflict is what happens because we have differing viewpoints. And that is a wonderful thing. The fact that we have such a wide variety of ways of thinking in our workplaces or in our lives just means that we have more opportunities to learn from each other. So it's a celebration of what we have in our workplace, of everybody thinking differently. And if we could just stop and say, okay, this is great, we have a conflict, let's look at this and see what we can do that'll be a growth area for both of us, for all of us, then we're addressing conflict in the positive way.
Mm-hmm. I think one of my closing thoughts is something Kalisha said, when you have to respond instead of react, and looking through the lens of the opposite person, looking from that other person's perspective. So
And just a few real quick from the chat, making sure the other person knows that you hear them, because too often people are just reacting and not responding. Remembering is only one person you can control, and that's on a good day. That's you. So,
Thank you, Monica.
and just the value in diversity, keeping it positive, being empathetic, being willing to share. Great information, you guys. The DISC assessments by Myers-Briggs, you guys can use as tools. Keeping it positive, being receptive, listening without bias. That's huge. That is huge.
Yeah.
So that was just a few more really that stood out in the chat. Great feedback, you guys.
You guys are really awesome. So the handout today will include the chart that we used for conflict resolution. And the good thing about it is that you can learn more about conflict resolution classes because we have web-based as well as our classroom sessions. So you can go ahead and find the handouts on our talent development page under Success Series webinar. You should receive that, and you should see that in a couple of days. You're gonna click on it and it brings up all the handouts from all the webinars that we've done. And something else, some other good news is that you can find our past webinars on our YouTube page just by searching Louisiana State Civil Service. And even if you can even search the webinar in Leo to find these webinars there, just in case you don't have YouTube. So we're everywhere is basically what I'm saying.
Just look over your shoulder.
Right. All right, so I want you guys to join us next month when we'll continue the topic of conflict styles with a look at the styles in more detail. So that webinar will be on November 19th at 1 o'clock. Thanks for joining us today. You guys have been an awesome group, and thank you to my wonderful panelists. And
thank you guys.
Thank you.
And don't forget to
keep on learning. Thank you, everyone.
Every day for every citizen.